Hey guys, in this video I want to talk about when J-types are like P-types and when P-types are like J-types. And in reality, J-types are P-types because they're using introverted sensing and introverted intuition. And P-types are actually J-types because they use introverted thinking, introverted feeling. So in socionics, J-types are actually called dynamic types. So J-types actually have very P-like qualities that P-types, they don't possess. And vice versa. I think it's actually very important to note this because we have our own type biases. P-types don't like J-types in a certain kind of way. J-types don't like P-types. So it's important to recognize when the other is expressing qualities that you possess, but in a different way. So J-types are like P-types and they're dynamic because introvert sensing and introvert intuition keeps changing continuously. And for instance, when it comes to introvert sensing, you need to keep finding ways to adjust and adapt so that we could reach homeostasis. The temperature is always changing, for instance, and the physical conditions keep changing. And things need to be, find a way to be course corrected into homeostasis at a very dynamic kind of way. So J-types have to be introvert sensing types have to be really dynamic in that regards. And in terms of introvert intuition, why that's dynamic is that the passage of time continuously changes. So this moment is different from this moment. And the intuitive type always has to keep adjusting to this change in time to what the trends are. And so they're actually dynamic in that way. They're actually perceiving types, but in a very inward way. Just like how perceiving types, extrovert intuitives and extrovert sensors, they look like they're spontaneous with their external environment. Introvert intuition, introvert sensing is actually inwardly spontaneously. Whatever that introvert sensing, introvert intuition presents, they spontaneously and adapt to it. So you really notice this kind of quality, and that's why they need expert thinking and expert feeling to provide that sense of structures so that they could be able to constantly adapt in a dynamic kind of way. And I think it's important to recognize this if you're a perceiving type. I'm a perceiving type because we think, oh, these judging types are really rigid. But actually, they're really flexible and spontaneous, but in a very different kind of way. And to a perceiving type, J-types don't seem like they're very conscious in a way because they just do, because they need to follow that J. And then they just do and they just abide by. But that's because that's coming from an inward flexibility, inward spontaneity of this SI and NI that keeps changing over time. I noticed that perceiving types can really have a problem with J-types with this, but it's really all yin-yang. So actually, the perceiving types are just like J-types, but flipped the other way, just like how the J-types are perceiving types, but just flipped the other way. Perceiving types are actually rigid in a way. They're actually called static types because extrovert intuition, extrovert sensing is static because given a certain situation, there are all these objective possibilities, and there's a set amount of these objective possibilities, and that does not change. And also extrovert sensing, the reality of the situation, how things are, that does not change. At least these things don't change continuously. Introvert sensing, introvert intuition changes constantly, continuously, but the objective possibilities of what's going on, not at a constant basis. And of course, I feel like extrovert intuitives would debate me on this idea of like, oh, there's set possibilities. And what I mean by extrovert intuition being about all these set number of possibilities is that it's as if they assume that all these possibilities exist and they're trying to draw them all out. So what are all the possible combinations of A, B, C, D? Well, you have A, B, C, D, and then you have B, A, C, D, and then you have A, B, D, C, and on until they are able to cover it all. But it's almost as if it's assumed that all these possibilities are already out there. So in that sense, it's static. And then the reality of the world, expert sensing, how things are, that is pretty self-explanatory, static. And these things are not changing on a continuous kind of basis. And then the other static quality of the perceiving types is that they're basing things on internal law, like introverted thinking or the internal sentiment. And that kind of causes a more rigid or slow changing quality. So you might think that J types, well, they're rigid, but like P types are rigid in a way, and that's why they need that external flexibility to that extroverted perceiving function. I hope you are not thinking that I'm just doing the old extrovert intuiting switcheroo, like, well, there's always a J aspect of P and a P aspect of J, and I'm covering all the possibilities that way. This is actually an observable quality. So if you observe INFJs and INTJs, for example, that there's some sort of easy breezy quality of physically speaking when you observe them physically and interact with them that they possess, and that is that kind of perceiving quality. The ENTJ, ENFJ, for instance, well, they're judging first, but when they show that NI aspect, it kind of also has a kind of feeling in which the NJs are simply trusting what emerges spontaneously in a very perceivery kind of fashion. Like intuitive intuition has is on a boat, and it spots an island of insight over the horizon. It goes like, oh, there's an island. And then there's an island. So it's almost like a expert perceiving type flip the other way, because that expert perceiving type will literally be on a boat, just exploring. And introvert sensing, same thing, is trusting what emerges, but in a very tangible sense. What tangibly emerges, something that is showing you that the homeostasis is off in some sort of way, and there needs to be a way to adapt. And it kind of has that feeling of movement, this continual adapting that the J types have, and that creates that perceivery kind of quality, whereas and that's more loose and flexible, whereas the P types have a bit of a J kind of feel to it, with that TI and FI being more about these rigid, not necessarily rigid, but more structural kind of internal law or internal sentiment that does not really trust what emerges internally. But this whole matter gets complicated further because of the demonstrative function. And I do want to mention that if you want to learn how to merge empathy with sense of mindful detachment in a way that is really helpful for your own psychological resilience, I have a video about that up here on my new channel on psychological resilience and psychotherapy. Thanks for watching.